Let's kick off. Welcome to today's training session on the current WHS requirements. We're going to look at some of the structure and perhaps how it's changed in the last few years and what that means for business today. Notice too the huge costs. You can see why governments are so keen, not just from a moral point of view that we want to keep people safe at work, but also from an economic point of view. Governments realise that this is a really important thing. But obviously the cost of human life and injury is beyond accounting, isn't it? The effect on families and so on. So let's, first of all, just before I start into this, we want to run a poll. First of all, what was the old safety law, first of all? Now today we're going to be talking about work health and safety, but what was the old safety law called? So I've got a few comments coming in there. Let's get everybody up and running. So make sure you remember to click submit to submit your thoughts. Okay, got about a third that have commented. We'll just leave that open for a little bit more. Let everybody have a chance. Okay, look, let's close that off. It seems to be fairly clear. Let's share those results. So there we go. We've had everyone said, of course, the old expression was OHS, so occupational health and safety. But of course, these days we refer to the expression work health and safety. The two terms are a bit interchangeable. We won't get too stuck up on it because work health and safety is what the law says, that expression, but the standards and some of the older legislation still use this expression OHS. But it's just in the wording. That's all that is. Okay, let's get into it now. This expression now, we want to look at this concept first of all. This is an underlying and fundamental concept. This one about, are we looking at a safe place or a safe person? Which do you think is better? Is it better to think in terms of keeping the workplace safe, or is it better to think in terms of keeping the person safe? Let's run another poll first of all. And first of all, just to get your input on this, and then I'll explain what it means. What's the difference between a safe workplace and a safe person? If you're not sure on the difference, just to say that too. Let's get the scope here. Now there is a historical reason, and there is a key difference in the approach, and you'll see this weaving through the rest of the session as well. Interesting. Okay, bit of variation there. It's all right. We'll just leave that open for a few seconds more, just to let a few more respond as well. Okay, look, let's close that one off, and we'll share the results on that. Okay, so we've had about half there saying that the safe workplace is a better approach, and that really is that is the answer. So the idea is, yes, we want to keep people safe, but the idea is if we can keep the work environment safe, then the individuals are more likely to be safe. Okay, so the idea is to focus on the environment rather than the individual. We focus on the environment first, the workplace, then we focus afterwards on the person. And that'll become evident as we go through our session. Let's see why that is the case. Let's look at, first of all, this example. This is an example of a worker. He's cleaning. Now, this is straight from a work health and safety textbook example, evidently based on a true story from this is from the Western Australia Safety Line Institute. So the worker, he's cleaning this pressurized filtration room. He's been doing it for 19 years. However, this particular day, he goes there and he forgets to depressurize the room. The door flings open, it smashes him against the brick wall. Sadly, he dies. He gets crushed. So the worker died. So what's the problem here, do you think? The fundamental problem. Is the fundamental problem the workplace, or is it the fundamental problem the person? So if we went back in the legislation, if we went back 100 years, the idea of the law was, well, in fact, up until the 1970s, the idea was that the person is at fault. That person needs to take more care. But now we swap that around and we go, no, the problem is the workplace is unsafe. Okay? Humans, we're going to make a mistake sooner or later. We've got to keep the workplace safe. And that's why the workplace is a fundamentally better approach than talking in terms of the keeping the person safe. Let's look at another example. Here's a traffic policeman. There's two traffic ladies, police ladies in Kathmandu, Nepal. Now, what is it that's unsafe about their work environment? Now, you can put these through on the chat window too. What is it that's unsafe about their work environment, do you think? They've got risk from the vehicles. They've got risk from the pollution. Now, what have they done to deal with those risks in that hazard in their workplace? What have they done? They've got a little stand. They've put a mask on. So trying to keep the individual safe. What would be a better approach if you were going to have a safe workplace for those police in that picture? What could you do to make their workplace safer? You could remove the vehicles. You could put in traffic lights, couldn't you? And then the policeman wouldn't need to be there at all in that environment. A better one, you could do something to change the laws and clean the air and so on. That would also be a good approach. But probably the most straightforward one would be to put traffic lights in there. High vis, yeah, good one. Thanks, Tony. That's another one. But again, high vis is focusing on the individual, on the person. By putting in traffic lights, something mechanical, we've got the person out of there altogether. All right, so we're going to look at these sorts of examples and we're going to try and change our thinking. So this is the natural response for us. We often go straight to the personal protective equipment, and that can be good. But what we want to try and do is focus on, is there a better approach? We'll come back to that later in the session. Let's move on first of all. So the idea is here we're controlling risks, focusing at the source of the problem. We're looking at the safe place rather than trying to change the behavior of the person. So if we were to have a look now at some of the legislation, and if you've got your worksheet, hopefully everyone's got your worksheet there. We would have we've dealt with some of you have the question. You've got some of you have two different worksheets. Now have a hand up. Sorry, Tony, do you have your hand up there?
Unmuted.
Hello. Oh, I'm unmuted.
Sorry, Tony, did you mean to have your hand up, or was it just an accident? Sorry, must have been. Maybe just send me a chat message if you accident. Thanks, Tony. Sorry about that. Okay, so the Work Health and Safety Act is the act of Parliament. This is the legislation that sits on the bottom, and they make the law. Now, one of the key differences with the Workplace and Health and Safety Act now is that it's moved from what's called civil law into criminal law. So this means in the past, work health and safety was an issue between, say, you and the boss, or you and another worker who was at fault. Now, in the last few years, it's moved into criminal law. So it puts it on the same plane as robbing a bank, as it were. You've got an issue with the state. So sitting on top of the regulation of the Act is the regulations. Now these two together, the Act and the regulations, are considered the law. When we say, oh, it's the law, this is what we're referring to. The difference is the Act doesn't add to it, but it has specific requirements. An example might be the Act might say, if you are negligent at work, it's going to cost you 10 penalty units. The regulation will say what a penalty unit is. It might start off as $1,000. But then they can update it, and it doesn't need to go back to Parliament to be updated. It can be updated, I understand, from a Senate Standing Committee. So they can update that penalty unit to $10,000, but they don't have to change the law. You don't have to change the act, that the regulation can be updated. It's a specific application of that. But those two together form the law. Now, sitting on top of that come things like the Australian standards, and then the codes of practice and other guidance material. Now, although those things aren't considered the law, if I get my pen out, these are the law here, like that. There is an exception. Sometimes the Australian standards are the law if, for example, the regulation or the act refers to the standard. So electrical is a good example of that. Electrical becomes the law because the law refers to that Australian standard, but generally they aren't. A code of practice can include things like working with hazardous chemicals, working in noise environments, what's safe there, manual handling, safe manual handling practices. Now, even though they are not obligatory, they're not part of the law, they're very persuasive. If someone is negligent, imagine a boss who's negligent and the worker goes deaf from the machinery, and so he goes to court, and the judge says, so what did you do to keep your workers safe? Oh, don't worry about that, it's all right. Didn't know anything about it. I was all right. You know, but then if he says, oh, I followed the code of practice, we did everything in there, well, the judge is going to go, well, that boss has not been negligent. He's done everything he can. Everything that was known about it, he followed that code of practice. So the boss, but otherwise, he could be considered negligent. So even though it's not the law, it's a good idea to follow them. And there's usually something which will apply in your workplace. And again, we'll also show you now where we can get those from as well, and other guidance material. So the structure now used to be very much state-based, the legislation. But what's happened as of January 2013, the idea is it becomes what's called harmonised between the states. So we have Safe Work Australia, and you can Google that, you know, safeworkaustralia.gov.au, and each of the states, South Australia, New South Wales, Queensland, have their state body. So the states will look after injury management and return to work and workers' compensation. But initially the harmonisation didn't include Victoria and Western Australia, and for their own reasons they hadn't joined the national program at that stage. But the idea is that the law is mirrored between the states. So it doesn't matter if a business is operating between the states, they can be fairly confident that those the same laws are going to operate in each place. So it makes it easier to do business, especially considering we're all wanting to accomplish the same thing. Okay, let's have a look at some of the key responsibilities under the law. Now, what they call it these days, they call these duties. Now, work health and safety duties apply to all of us, and we can't transfer a duty to somebody else. The boss can't say, oh no, I paid this guy to do it. No. We all have a duty and we can't transfer it. So this concept of duties is fundamental in the law. So let's have a look at some of these duties. One of them, of course, is that what we call the old duty of care. We need to all work safely to prevent or avoid or eliminate harm to ourselves or others. So there's a fundamental duty which applies to all of us. They now then compartmentalise some of the responsibilities in the workplace. So one of the examples is called a PCBU. Now, what's a PCBU? Sounds like a plastic, doesn't it? What does it stand for? It stands for person conducting a business or undertaking. Now, the boss has to do things like you can see in the picture here. Who's the boss in the picture there? Well, it could be her, but it could be him. It looks like him with the tie on, doesn't it? It looks like the boss. So what's he doing? He's providing important information and instructions. That's one of the roles of the boss. He also has to be mindful of the type of worker. It could be someone who's young and inexperienced. It could be a person with limited English or some other limitation, and he has to make sure they still understand what's required in the workplace. It also extends to what's called an officer, somebody who has or can make big decisions within the company, may not be the CEO. They are also fall under a similar situation, and they are referred to as an officer. So that's the PCBU. So the PCBU, the boss, he also has to make sure that the machinery is well maintained, and he has to maintain and monitor that work equipment. Now this comes through to us as workers. What do we need to do? Obviously, we've got to take care of ourselves and others, but who is a worker, first of all? What's the definition of a worker? What would you say? What's the definition of a worker? You've got to put a comment through on the chat window if you want to. What's the definition of a worker? Is it just an employee? Interestingly, the current legislation broadens the view of a worker, and it says anybody, an employee, it could be an outworker, it could be an apprentice, it could be a student gaining work experience, it could be a volunteer, it could be a contractor. All these are now grouped as worker. The previous law was sometimes a bit fuzzy on this, who was a worker and who wasn't. So some of the responsibilities of a worker, we need to make sure we warn other people of dangers. Hey mate, stop that. Don't do that. That's a duty we have. Now, if its work is dangerous, thanks to a person delegated to a task. Yeah, good. So whether they're paid or not. Now, let's have a look. I want to run a poll here. Tell me, can a worker stop work? Can the worker refuse or stop work on their own initiative if they feel it's unsafe? Yes or no? Oh, look at that. Oh, the answers are flooding through. You're all over this one. Great. Okay. I'll just leave that open for a moment longer, give everybody a chance to comment. Remember to click submit. Okay. Look, I think that's pretty clear. Let's just close that off. I'll show you the result. So yeah, everyone says, of course, yes, we can do that as workers if we need to. Of course, we've got to be reasonable about it. But we want to warn others. That's the other thing, isn't it? It's not just about us, it's about the people we work with. We also need to follow reasonable instructions. If there's a sign up, if there's a procedure that the boss, the PCBU, gives us, then we have a duty to follow that. Now, interestingly, we may have more than one duty. So think, for example, of a contractor who goes to work in a shopping centre. Now, that contractor may have his offsider with him. He may have an apprentice. So he is a PCBU, and he's got to take care of the person working with him. But as he goes to work on that site, he might be contracted by the building management, say, not Woolworths, but Westfield, okay? So they have a duty. He may be working in the Woolworths store. So Woolworths also have as a duty, and they have a duty to their shoppers who may be there too. So there's multiple overlapping duties in this case. Building management has a responsibility because they've contracted him to do the work. He's there on the Woolworths site, so they have a duty to care for their people. He also has a duty for himself, and he also has a duty for the person who's working for him. So he can be a PCBU and a worker at the same time. So these responsibilities or duty as we call them can overlap. HSR and a HSC. Now in the past this was a little bit different. For example, in New South Wales, a health and safety committee was mandatory if you have a certain amount of workers. But now it's not. It's up to the workers. If it's requested or if 5 or more workers want it, then they'll put into place a health and safety committee. A HSR is a representative, and the representative only has power if he's trained. If he's trained, and he has a minimum 5 days training in the first year and a minimum of 1 day professional development every year after that, then he's got some power and he can issue a stop work and these sorts of things. He's a representative. Okay, so these are the basic responsibilities. Let's see how this relates and fits together. So you have the government. Now, a government, now I don't get into the politics of this, of course, but the government's core job, what's the role of the government? If we were to be ideological and go, what is it? Well, the idea of a government is to care for the people, isn't it? That's their responsibility, keep the people safe and give them structure and framework to work within. Okay, so then fitting in with that is the PCBU. Now, what does the PCBU stand for again? Person conducting business or undertaking. Okay, it's the PCBU. The PCBU then, of course, then as workers we fit in there. Then, so we've got different levels of government. We've got the Commonwealth, we've got state government, we've got different types of PCBU, we've got the employers, we've got directors within the business. Then as workers, we've got different types of workers. We've got employees, we've got contractors, we've got voluntary workers. So the law meant quite some changes for business like Meals on Wheels. So people who are going in voluntary are going to use their commercial kitchen, cook and deliver meals. They now need to make sure that they know how to operate that equipment. They need to, the Meals on Wheels organisation to make sure they're trained and have the proper safety equipment if needed. So the whole idea then of is in this part here. This is our next core concept that we're looking at. This is the duty to consult. So this is all about getting the boss and the worker to talk. This is an age-old issue. It's been around for a long time. They've got to talk, consult. And this is where the HSR comes in. What did HSR stand for? Health and Safety Representative. So this Health and Safety Representative is all about getting this boss and the worker to communicate, to talk. So this brings us to our next key point, and the next key point is that of consultation. So tell me, why do you think consultation is a good idea? Why do you think that would be a core duty? Can we put that through on the chat window? Tell me, what do you think? Why do you think consultation is so important? Why do you think consultation is so important? Can you think of an example, perhaps even from your work, your life, to ensure understanding? Thank you, Joanne. Yeah, good. Make sure your workers understand, but also the workers need to make sure the boss understands, because he may be sitting up in his office and so he needs to know what's going on the floor. Yeah, good one. What's another one we've learned, especially those of you doing the management course? What have you learned about the importance of consultation and involving people in decision making? I'm sure everyone agrees. Thank you, Christy. Yeah. It engages everyone. What were those buzzwords? Things like buy-in and ownership, weren't they? Yeah, taking ownership. Great. Thanks, Joanne. Yeah. Interestingly, a comment from one of the reviews after a disaster in Australia, one of these health and safety, it says the reviewer said, disasters are eminently preventable. They're not unforeseeable and not unprecedented. In many cases, the circumstances are disturbingly similar to those of earlier disasters. Too often they amount to carbon copies of earlier disasters. This is what makes them so preventable. If only we had learnt and applied the lessons of earlier disasters, the most recent of the series would have been prevented. That was in 1990 by Mr. Hopkins. Yeah. So get the work as a key point in consultation. So we have the key point of duties, we have the key point of consultation. Now, what opportunities do you have for consultation? Can you give me some comments? What do you do for consultation in your workplace? It's all about communication, isn't it? What have we got? What sort of ways have we got to communicate and consult? A branch meeting, great, thanks. So, thanks, Christy. Get everyone together, formal meetings. Okay, what else can we do? What other opportunities are there to consult? Regular toolbox talks. Thanks, Demi, and thanks Tony. Good comments. Yeah. Team huddles. Thanks, Joanne. Yeah, that's a bit more affectionate, isn't it? Eh? And it only takes a few minutes. That idea of a team huddle, it gives the idea that it doesn't have to be long. Good one. Thanks, Demi. Memos and emails. Yeah, so things that can be written. Yeah. We've got a few examples here. We've got inductions at the workplace when people start. We've got pre-startup checks as a way to consult. People often worry, where do my vehicle checks, where do they go? But that's a way, it's a form of consultation. Toolbox safety meetings, training sessions, of course, on-the-job assessments, even the boss coming out, the old undercover boss idea, or he doesn't have to be undercover even, just coming out with you. Doing reports, inspections, etc. Follow-ups after a near miss or incident accident. Yeah. So that's a way of consulting what actually happened, especially those near misses. Okay, often underestimated, but that's our warning sign, isn't it? All right, let's keep going. Another way of getting workplace information. Where can we get workplace information from? Workplace information can be gathered from what places? Notice boards, good one, thanks Christy. We've got manuals, good one, thanks Joanne, thanks, yeah, good. Posters and signs is another way we can get that. When we, like for example, think of your evacuation poster is a way of getting that. We have the supervisor or manager, so don't underestimate the other people. Intranet, thanks Joanne, yeah, so especially with Flick there, you've got those policies and procedures on your intranet available. Okay. Toolbox meetings, memos, policies and procedures, yes, we've had that one. Good. Safety data sheets. Now, safety data sheets, what's with that? Well, they used to be called material safety data sheets, MSDS. Now they're simply called safety data sheets. Now they've been around for a few years now, so you should find that there should be no more material safety data sheets left in your collections. They should all be called safety data sheets now. And it wasn't just a terminology change, there was some change in the structure evidently, although they do look fairly similar. But that's a good test as to whether your ones are up to date, first of all, and they need to be updated every 5 years by the manufacturer. All right. Very good, so that's some sources of workplace information. Let's move on now. We're going to look now at the hazard management process. And we'll look at this, those of you doing the Certificate 4 in management, you've got a risk management activity there as well, hazard management on the page there. But this is the basic process. Okay, so what we've looked at so far is the legislation, the law so far, and consultation and duties. Now we're going to move on to this idea of hazard management, and we're going to see why that fundamental ideas of the safe workplace now, how this affects your hazard management process. So the idea basically is, of course, spot the hazard, assess the risk, make the changes. How does this work? Now, first of all, what is a hazard? Now, there's often some confusion here, and even between the words hazard and risk. So first of all, what is a hazard? How would you define a hazard? Let's get some comments through on the chat. How would you define a hazard? What is a hazard? What is a hazard? What is a hazard? Because there's a difference. What is a hazard? Oh, wet floor. Sorry, I've just realised. I'll put that on the screen for you already. Okay, wet floor. Okay, Christy, good one. We're going to come back to Christy's wet floor in a minute. But oh, what a joke. Okay, so I hope you're all laughing along with me, by the way. Okay, anyway, the human injury, anything that causes harm, could be human injury, sickness, damaging property, or the environment, okay? So these are two key ones. Sometimes the property is missed, and sometimes the environment is missed, particularly as we move on to the sustainability unit next week. It can afford that. Okay, anything that will cause harm. Now, let's move on. Let's have a look how to find hazards. Now here's a key to finding the hazards. We ask ourselves, where is the energy? So tell me, what's the energy here? What energy source is in the picture? What's the energy source? This is a trick. This is a one technique for finding hazards. Well, that's electricity, isn't it? In the picture. Now, next energy source. What's this energy source? Come on, get through in the chat. See who's first. Okay, wood. Wood, Matt. Enough. Wood. The energy source is heat. Okay, heat is the energy. It may be running on wood. It could be running on oil or fuel, anything. Okay, but heat is the energy. Okay, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, Matt, misunderstanding. Okay, what about this one? Where's the energy? What sort of energy is this one? I should say. What's the type of energy? Motion, yes, motion, or we could say mechanical energy. Yeah. Okay, what about this one? What about this one? Do we come across this one very often? Now think a bit bigger. Look at radiation. Good one. Thanks, India. Yeah. So it's not just nuclear. It can be other forms of radiation as well, which could be coming from our screens or mobile devices or anything else. Okay, what about this one? What sort of energy is there? What sort of energy is there? Chemical. Good one, India. India's on fire. Okay, great. Chemical energy. And Tony's got chemical too. Good, thank you. What about this one? What's energy is represented there? That one's fairly obvious. Think sound, yes, sound or noise. Okay, good. What about this one? What about this one down the bottom left, a new one? What's that one? What's the energy source there? Gravity, gravity. Okay, good. Thanks, thanks Noni, thanks Demi, thanks Matt. I think Matt squeaked in first on that one. So, gravity. Now, gravity, think of slips, trips, falls, things dropping from a height. They're all related to gravity. So that's a big one, a big energy source. Okay, what else have we got here? Okay, all right, what about this one? What about this one down? What's this one? This one's a bit more tricky. What's this one? Human, yeah. Thanks, India. We call this one psychosocial. So we'll look at that again in a minute. And finally, this one. Finally, what's that hazard? FOL, I'm not sure. I'm not sure that acronym. Thanks. Okay, Matt. Bacteria. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. So biological. Okay. Bacterial. Yeah. Thanks, Matt. Okay. So now let's have a look at this picture. What's the hazard in this picture? I'm going to launch a poll. You tell me, what was the hazard in the picture? What was the hazard in the picture? Good one. Okay, let's close that off. Everyone's got that one. Obviously, that was gravity. Good one. Okay, let's move on to the next example. Okay, this one's a bit trickier. What's the hazard here? What's the hazard? I won't run a poll. Now, this is where you're probably thinking something like musculoskeletal. But you've got to go, hang on a minute, that's the risk. That's what the consequence can be. The actual gravity, India, yeah. Look, that's probably, if you're going to use the energy system, Yeah, that's about the closest one, isn't it? That's where the source is coming from. That's the problem. If there was no gravity, he wouldn't have to worry about that weight, would he? Okay. But obviously, the carrying, the manual handling is an issue. Okay, let's look at this one. What's the hazard here? What's the hazard here? Noise. It could be noise. Yeah. Thanks, Noni. But what do you think's the more obvious, the greater risk there, the greater hazard, I should say. The greater hazard there would be stress. So they would put that under psychosocial, and stress has been a big one. Yeah. Thanks, Noni. Psychosocial. Now let's have a look. What's common wrong idea about hazards? Now, water on the floor. Is it a hazard? Now, this is where the challenge is. We've got to stop and ask ourselves, where's the hazard coming from? Where's the real hazard? Because if we just mop the floor, we may not be dealing with the real hazard. Because the real hazard, because we've got to ask ourselves, well, where's the water coming from? How did it get there? It could be a leaking pipe. So we ask ourselves, we can use the 5 why method. So ask ourselves why 5 times. Why is there water on the floor? Because of the leaking pipe. Why is there a leaking pipe? Because the join is broken. Well, why is the join broken? Because the maintenance team haven't inspected it. Well, why didn't the maintenance team inspect it? Well, because it's not on their checklist. Why is it? Anyway, we get to the source of the issue. Okay. So when we think of hazards, try and think of what's the source of the problem. Where is this coming from? Water on the floor. How did it get there? Okay. All right. What's a hazard report? Why is a hazard report then, do you think, important to work health and safety? If you can give me a comment, send me something through in the chat again. Why do you think hazard reports are important to work health and safety? Why is it important? A hazard report could be something as simple as a checklist, where you're going through and doing an inspection. But it can also, often in workplaces, they've got a hazard report form. Why are they important? Identify and improve processes. Thanks, Joanne. That's a good one. Yeah. Yeah. And to avoid risk. Good one. Thanks, Matt. Yeah. Because we want to identify the hazard and fix it before it causes an issue. Identifies risks and hazards. Prevents accidents. Yeah. Excellent. That's a good one, Tony. Mark says identify issues. Yeah. Very good. Thank you. So that's what we want to do. You know, I've met guys who've I've worked along with doing the training with them. I remember one guy in a warehouse, it was a 24-hour paper warehouse, and he said, oh, this rack over there's got a problem. I said, oh, what'd you do about it? Oh, I told the boss. Did you fill in the hazard form? No. Why not? Oh, I told the boss. Yeah, I said, by the time he's got to the end of the aisle, what's happened? He's forgotten all about it. That's why you've got all the forms here. Let's fill one out right now. Didn't take long. Record keeping for audits. Thanks, Demi. Yeah, that's good. That's good to, and also especially for those of you who are working with the ISO requirements and those international standards. Good. Okay. Now let's move on to what's called the hierarchy of control. This is a key point in our hazard management and our risk control. Okay, we're going to talk about this too in our face-to-face sessions and so on. But this is the key point. Now this links to the safe place, safe person concept and keeping a safe workplace. So notice the priorities. Now, first of all, how are we going to remember this? Every Sunday I eat apple pie. Okay, ESIEAP. Every Sunday I eat apple pie. There's our little rhyme for remembering it. And so this is a key point. We call this the hierarchy of control. Now I'll go through and explain each one of these steps. But notice what it does, it focuses on, so you work from the top down. And notice that it focuses on the workplace. You're eliminating, you're substituting, you're isolating, you're doing engineering, physical things. Where at the bottom is the personal protective equipment. And often that's our natural response. We'll go straight to the PPE. We've got to try and change our thinking around. Let's take it through one step at a time. Elimination. Now, elimination means getting rid of the problem altogether. and that should be the best results wherever possible. Okay, so that may not always be possible though. What might be an example of elimination? Have you tried elimination in your workplace? Have you got an example of that? What have you done to eliminate? Now, there can be a subtle difference between eliminate and substitute. So you can give me an example. Let's put some through on the chat window, some examples of safety things you've put into place in your workplace, and let's see if we can work out which level they're at. Okay. Remove chemical that's not needed. Thank you, Matt. Classic example. Now, we might think that that's elimination, but if we can get rid of the chemicals altogether, that's great. But often what happens is that we still need the chemical. So Matt's thinking of the printery, and as I am too, like you think of a press room, you still need chemicals. So, but what you might be able to do is get one chemical that's quite dangerous and substitute it for a chemical that's less dangerous. Now that becomes substitution, because you've used and substituted an alternative. It could be also your work on the road. Okay, you may not be able to eliminate the work on the road, but you can do it at night time when there's less traffic. All right, so that's substitution. Elimination would be, for example, perhaps outsourcing something altogether. You've got a piece of equipment that you use, it's a bit dangerous, and you think, well, hang on a minute, let's actually stop this work altogether, let's do something else, or we'll buy it from outside. That would be elimination. So elimination and substitution. Next one is isolation. Now remember, isolation too is a physical barrier or a physical restriction. It could be a key in the forklift. That's an isolation. If you actually remove the key, you've physically isolated it. The next one is engineering controls. Now this includes, again, physical things, guardrails, scaffolding, exhaust systems, exhaust fans, that sort of thing. It's an engineering control. Now sometimes these ones, engineering and isolation, they get joined together because it can be a bit difficult to determine the difference sometimes. We're going to look at a couple of examples in a minute. Then finally, administrative. Now, administrative is non-physical. Okay, it's not actually physical. You put a sign up, there's nothing to stop the person walking past the sign. You give a person training. There's no reason to say that, you know, how can we know that they're actually going to follow the training? We give them a license to drive a car or a forklift, but there's no, here's your license. But even if a person doesn't have a license, can they still drive the car? Yeah, they can still drive a car. Okay, so there's a limit. That's why administration is down the line. And finally, personal protective equipment. So we always should start at the top, elimination, always the best results by working from the top down. And then our PPE, of course, because then we're actually, what we're doing is keeping the person safe. We're trying to shield the person. Okay, but better to try and make the environment safe. Now, let's look at this. So there's our, every Sunday I eat apple pie. We call this the hierarchy of control. Let's look at some examples. But first of all, why is elimination first and PPE last? Just to emphasize this point. Well, why the spaceman? Well, eliminating the spacewalk is safer than being out there with a spacesuit. So really what he's got is some elaborate PPE. But robots in space would be much safer than sending a person up there, if that was possible. So if the spacesuit is a PPE, if he was on a tether line, what would the tether line be? Which one of those for the spaceman? Tether line would be... I'd put it down as engineering. Okay, let's use the hierarchy. Here's a picture. Let's give me some feedback on this here. What needs to be done? And what level of the hierarchy? What can we do to eliminate? Can we do anything to eliminate here in this picture? Now again, if you want to answer this through the microphone, you can. Just put your hand up, I'll unmute you. Otherwise, put it through on the chat. Move obstruction to the exit door. Yes, so that's the problem. We've got an obstruction on the exit door. If we move that, is that really elimination? Have we eliminated it? Has it actually stopped it happening again? Remove the rubbish. Yes, we remove the rubbish. But is that elimination? Will it stop it happening again? Because it's not true elimination if it doesn't actually stop it happening. Fire equipment needs to be ready, available. Eliminate obstacles. Good, thank you, Christy. That's very important. Now, but let's go through our hierarchy. Let's go to the next one then. Elimination, substitution, isolation. Every Sunday I eat apple pie. Isolation. What could we do isolation here? What could we do for isolation? So we're thinking physical barriers. Put bollards in to prevent things being stored. Yeah, good one. Thanks, Joanne. That's a good example of isolation. If we put those bolt the poles to the ground. Floor markings. Interesting one, Matt. Which one is floor markings, do you think? Which one? Let's open this up to everyone. Tell me floor markings. Which one of the hierarchy is floor marking? This one often comes up and it's often misunderstood. Floor markings. Administration. Thanks, Christy. Yeah, we've got a few different ideas there. But floor markings would come under administration. Okay? It doesn't physically stop the person walking over the line. Okay, so it becomes under administration. If we put a fence up, we get isolation. All right, we've got a few other things we could pick on in that picture too. We could look at the sharp cages and all that sort of thing, but let's look at another example. Again, we want to work through our hierarchy on this example, okay? Let's have a look here. What can we do? And tell me what it is. What can we do to help this guy? What are the hazards? What can we do about it? Work through the top. Can we eliminate? Substitute? What can we do? How can we substitute? Ooh, we know it's dangerous. We know he's a bit shaky up there. Correct equipment, ladder, scaffold. Yeah, substitute a higher ladder. Substitution. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Joanne. Yes, so using a ladder, a safety rope. Safety rope would be harness, PPE. Yeah, a harness, because it's a physical engineering control, we can put that under engineering. Harness, if it was, say, bolted to the wall or something. Yeah. PPE, yeah. Again, we've started at the wrong end with PPE. We've got to start at the top. So we want to eliminate it. So, for example, he might be able to eliminate by assembling on the ground and then lifting it up. He doesn't have to work at the height and have the effect of gravity. He could then, we could substitute and use a better ladder. That's probably the most obvious one. Yeah, isolation is not really a point there, except to stop other people walking underneath. Isolation, outsource it. Thanks, thanks, India. That's an elimination. Good one, India. Yeah, get someone else to do it. Okay. All right. Let's look at one more example here. Let's use the hierarchy here. What can we do here? Now you're going to think, first of all, you're going to think, oh, hard hat. That's PPE. You've started at the wrong end. Start at the other end. Don't start with PPE. Start from the top. Every Sunday I eat apple pie. Elimination. Can I eliminate? Can I substitute? Can I isolate? Can I engineer? What can I do? He's in India, of course, Mumbai. The number plate gives that away. So why don't we do this in Australia? Well, one of the things they do in Australia is the scaffolding, is they've got kickboards and enclosed scaffolding to try and stop things falling down in the first place. That's an engineering control. That's above putting hard hats on. Okay, we're going to try and keep the workers away from areas where things are falling. So that's why we put up fences around building and construction sites. Yeah. So PPE is a good thing, but again, we've got to start thinking outside the box. We've got to start thinking safe work environment. What can we do to keep this guy safe at work without the PPE? Use the PPE as a last resort. Okay. So what they look at too, there's another expression in the current legislation which is called reasonable and practical. So we've got to look and balance this up, and they say, look, how much, depending on the specific circumstances, what is capable of being done? Is this possible? And how much is known about it? What are the costs? What's the risk? How much is known about it? For example, 10 years' time, your worker comes back to you and says, I got brain cancer from the mobile phone that you gave me for work. Well, at the time now, there's nothing known about that. Okay, so you can't be held responsible for it. What's relevant? Is it a small business? Is it a big business? How much money is available? So is it reasonable? Is it practical to put in those alternatives? Another example of a change is the first aid. How many people do we need? How many people are there per first aid representative in a workplace? How many workers to first aid representative? What's the ratio? I found the coconut tree. Thanks, Noni. I just saw your comment. How many workers per first aid? That's a trick question. It's no longer specified. Okay, it depends on the type of work, the type of hazards that the workers are facing, size of the work area, the location of it, type of workers. So, for example, workers who are young and new are going to need perhaps more attention. If you're working with heavy machinery as to working in an office, so there's no blanket rule. The PCBU, the boss, needs to weigh up the risks in his workplace. So we all have a duty, just to summarise now, we all have a duty for safety, and whether we're the manager or a supervisor or whether we're a worker, we have a duty to follow instructions and to keep ourselves and others safe in the workplace. What do we need to do? What is it for us? We need to support the work health and safety rules, help other people to follow the rules, ask others to stop unsafe work, and use this hierarchy of control to manage our hazards. All right, let's run a short test then, and so you give a chance to offer some. So this is a quick review of our session today. We'll launch this short test and then we'll wrap it up for next time. So remember to click submit at the end of this. What we'll do in our next sessions too, in our next face-to-face sessions, we'll also look at risk and how to see how work health and safety and some of the underlying principles of risk. But that also affects sustainability, and so in next week's session, you're welcome to join us again. We look forward to having you. We'll be talking about sustainability and how that applies to your business. But that's it from me for today. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Have a good morning, and welcome. I'll hang around for a minute or two, and in case anyone needs a hand with anything. But please send through your comments, send through a chat, tell me one thing you've learned or enjoyed about today's session. And I hope